Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I must apologize if you happen to hear any background noise, but I'm recording this lecture without the use of my headset because I've had trouble with my headset twice, so I'm using the primary sound recording on my laptop. But anyway, we're looking at the third portion of Christianity, which is the Protestant Reformation. And when I've taught this course in a seated environment, most individuals can tell me very quickly who the individual is, who the person is on the left. That would be Martin Luther. But if I ask them whom is on the right, I don't get the response very much. I do get some individuals that are able to name whom that person is, but that person is John Calvin. John Calvin had a very substantial impact with the theology with a lot of the churches in certainly the Ozark area, the area in which I'm from. But to kind of understand a lot of the protests made by Luther, there is some basic Catholic theology which needs to be understood. One of the first is mortal sin versus venial sin. And what exactly is this? Well, mortal sin leads to the removal of grace, of God's grace from a person's soul, while venial sin does not. The terms mortal sin and venial sin mostly come out of the Christian West, the Catholic side, although those in the Orthodox Church would hold to the theology behind it, though it is not terminology that they often use for a specific reason. But it would come from essentially the ending of the first letter of John, where the author states how sin is sin, but not all sin is mortal. To try and explain it, and I wish I was able to draw a Venn diagram to help explain it better, which I am not able to here, but essentially, you are to be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect, referencing Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount in the Gospel of Matthew. But sin damages this relationship. If you engage in venial sin, you have hurt that relationship. You are not where you should be with God, but you are not among the damned. God's grace is still within you. The relationship between you is damaged, but you are not spiritually dead. Whereas if you commit mortal sins, God's grace has left you and you are considered spiritually dead. And also, if you belong to a church tradition which practices the sacrament of reconciliation, you are only supposed to go and receive that sacrament if you've committed a mortal sin. If you've committed a venial sin, you can confess that sin directly to God, priesthood of all believers. You don't have to go to the spiritual confessor, priesthood of all believers, and then prescribe whatever penance you feel is best. It's with the mortal sin that you are supposed to go and receive the sacrament because you are considered to be outside the grace of God and thus spiritually dead. And it's ironically for that reason why, one of the reasons why within the Orthodox Church they don't often use the term mortal sin and venial sin, even though they agree with the theology behind it. Some Orthodox theologians in the West will. But it's because it almost essentially creates, a list of sins. So it's like, okay, well, I haven't engaged in idolatry. I haven't engaged in adultery. I haven't engaged in sorcery. Oh, so there's no reason for me to go and receive the sacrament. Where, no, from their perspective, sin is sin, confession is good for the soul, and go receive the sacrament. But where this becomes an issue, and certainly where it would affect the psyche of Luther, is if you forget to confess one mortal sin, down you go, that's it, it's all over, because you are considered to be spiritually dead. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to that, that the church has referenced, throughout the centuries, that maybe you're unable to receive the sacrament, or you don't remember committing the sin. Or another thing that's, more important is, from the perspective of, Catholic Orthodoxy and also within the Church of England, God is not bound to sacraments. God is an all powerful being. He can do whatever he wants. Humans are bound to sacraments, but God is not. God can do whatever he wants. He's an all powerful being. But the basic theology, though, is still if you are in a state of mortal sin, the grace of God has left you and you are spiritually dead. And that would be, a factor for Luther because it is still the teaching. Like I said, there are exceptions that are made, but it's still the teaching that if you forget to confess one mortal sin, you're spiritually dead. Down you go, that's it, it's all over. Another term here, Catholic theology, is what is known as the treasury of merit. And what exactly is that? Well, it's the extraordinary actions that Jesus and the saints performed while they were here on earth and are stored up in heaven, which others can access. So, what exactly is the treasury of merit? Well, to paraphrase Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, don't store your treasures here on earth where they become rusty and where thieves come and try to steal them. Store them up in heaven. And also paraphrasing the author of the letter to the Colossians, which is traditionally the Apostle Paul, I am suffering for your sake, for essentially your benefit. Okay, here's the idea. To give an example, one of the other jobs that I have is cleaning a couple buildings. And in this job, they have where you meet the standard. This is what you are supposed to do. And then there is exceeding the standard. Exceeding would be going beyond what is necessary. To use again myself as with an example of this, one of the buildings that I clean is a church. And I clean this particular church over a 2-day period. I do what's called the first pass, and then I come in the next day and do what's known as the second pass. Okay, one of the things in the first pass is essentially getting the trash out of the building. Well, there are times that I have, you know, been there on the second pass, which what I do there is pretty much vacuuming and mopping. But there are times during the second day I have gone and taken out the trash again. because I feel that it's the right thing to do. Well, I technically don't have to do that because I've already done it the day prior. But I do it again because I feel that it is the right thing to do. Well, because what I've done in this sense was beyond what was necessary, that is essentially been stored up into a, we could say, like a treasure chest in heaven. Or to try and think of it another way, there are the everyday actions, what you are supposed to do, the bare minimum of what you are supposed to do in life, whether that be to your fellow human being or to whomever is around you, the world in general. Well, let's say that you exceed what you are supposed to do. Because you've gone beyond what you're supposed to do, those actions are stored up in heaven in this particular theology. Well, Jesus and the saints, while they were on earth, alive on earth, they did actions that were beyond what they were supposed to do, just in everyday life. And those extraordinary actions, beyond what was necessary just to do for everyday life, are stored up in heaven, which can benefit others. To give some examples with that, in the Hebrew Bible, or what Christians would call the Old Testament, when Solomon, King Solomon, commits idolatry and loses divine favor, God informs him about how I'm not going to take away the kingdom during your lifetime because of how much I love my servant David, which of course would be his father. That basically, in this scenario, David's actions were so extraordinary that those extraordinary actions came to benefit Solomon. That Solomon essentially wasn't going to lose the kingdom of Israel during his lifetime. Or another example in the New Testament would be the extraordinary faith of the centurion, the Roman centurion, where Jesus was so impressed by his faith, where, of course, Jesus is like, all right, I'll come to your house and heal your servant. The centurion's like, no, no, I'm not worthy that you should even come under my roof, etc., etc. That Jesus was so impressed by his faith that it came and benefited the centurion's servant. So essentially, what it is here is that Jesus and the saints, they performed actions on the earth that was beyond what needed to be done in just everyday life. And so their extraordinary actions or merit can come for the benefit of others. Well, we're going to need to stop here, but when we come back, we will look at a little bit more of Catholic theology, which of course will set the scene with getting into Protestantism, getting into Luther. So take care. I will symbolically see you then.